Hi all, welcome back. I hope you've nourished your bodies in some way over that break and have had some time to let the ideas shared with us this morning settle in. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Vanessa Andreotti, author of Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and Implications for Social Action, and one of the co-founders of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. She has much more on her resume, and her bio is in the program. I do want to mention it is very early for her in the morning. So we're really grateful that she's been able to join us. She's been up for a little while. So thank you so much, Vanessa. Vanessa is going to ask what stories we need to stop telling and ideas and institutions we need to stop investing in if we're to open the imagination to other, as yet unthought possibilities, and consider the importance of the relationships with land as partner and in imagination. I want to say, for those of us that are on the call with us today and in this community and audience with us, there's no chair in Terry's session. So can I please invite everyone to really come into the room with her? And I know you've all already been sharing, but just really share your reflections in the chat so Vanessa can feel the warmth of the group that is here and the warmth of the community that is here. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Vanessa to take us through some new ideas.
Thank you so much, Farah. Yes, it is very early, and I think I'll start with that. I asked Google, what time should I be there? And Google gave me the wrong time. So if I yawn at the presentation, there's nothing to do with me being bored. It's just that it told me to be here at 4:30 in the morning. And then I arrived 1 hour earlier, and I haven't been able to go back to sleep. So in order to make this presentation more intelligible, I knew that 5:30 would also be a stretch. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. And you'll see that it's going to be a little bit more word heavy because I'll be reading more, and this is to compensate for the time issue. I would like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm in as a living entity, not as a property or a resource. And these are the territories, the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam indigenous peoples. And as I acknowledge this, I need to affirm my responsibility to support people, indigenous people everywhere, to have their stolen backs returned to them and their livelihoods restored. And with that, I'm going to start with quotes from Chief Ninawa Hunikui, who is one of our collaborators in the Amazon forest in Brazil. The Hunikui people are consider themselves to be the guardians of the Amazon forest and part of the forest, and they are very strong advocates against carbon markets and how carbon markets are being used in the global south to really dispossess indigenous people and to financialize, monetize, commodify, and commercialize nature, and they are against that. But they have a specific analysis of our Western imagination. And that's why I would like to start with that. And this is an angle that Carrie asked me to take. So if you have any complaints like later, it's with Carrie. So what Chief Ninawa Hunikui says is that colonialism is a cognitive, affective, and relational impairment based on illusions of separation that have damaged our relationships with our own selves, with each other, with other species, and with the land and the planet as a whole. He also says that a genuinely different future depends much less on the images we create in our heads than on our ability to repair and to weave relationships differently in the present. And that the impaired modern colonial imagination cannot solve the problems that the impaired modern colonial imagination has created. So today we're going to focus on the middle one, the middle point about trying the tendency that we have in Western societies to try to project an idealized image of the future and believe that we can plan towards that instead of staying with the problems of the present, and staying with, in our collective, we talk about the shit, the literal and metaphorical shit. So people generally want to skip the shit into the good space and just jump straight into the good space. But that jump and the time and resources and energy that we spend trying to create an image of the future and convince others about that image, from Chief Ahnikui's perspective, is kind of misguided in the sense of the importance of the shit. So from his perspective, if there's no shit, there's no starter to create a different future together. And if we look at modern education, we're going to see that we're left unequipped and unprepared to deal with that shit. And so my presentation today is about trying to convince you to stay with the shit, to stay with the trouble, and to expand your capacity to sit with difficult and painful things without feeling overwhelmed, immobilized, without demanding quick fixes, and without demanding to be rescued from discomfort. And in that sense, instead of telling you about things, what I decided to do, which is new, I haven't tried it before, is to create a different learning experience that could speak to you cognitively, affectively, and relationally. And so what we're going to do is that I'm going to start with an exercise that invites you to take 7 steps back. Then we're going to have an intermission. And then there's going to be a rude diagnostic exercise. And after the rude diagnostic exercise, we're going to go back to the exercise of steps. And then I'm going to invite you to take 7 steps forward or aside. And then at the end, I will just put the links to the 2 exercises on the chat. But I split the invitations in the middle so that we could have an intermission there. So I'll start with the 7 steps back. And in this exercise, it's just a set of questions that might be useful in gatherings. For example, that's how they emerged from difficulties we were observing in climate change gatherings of experts or regular people or educators trying to approach the climate catastrophe and the biodiversity apocalypse, as the UN refers to it. And we could see that the gatherings would always encounter the same problems, and generally they were problems related to relationships falling apart. So this is kind of an invitation to avoid the usual traps that we fall into. And the first invitation is for us to step back from our own self-image. So questions that go with that stepping back include understanding what our real investments, fears, hopes, and intentions are. Where do they come from? What emotions, insecurities, unexamined desires, or unprocessed traumas could be driving our decision-making? What emotional states are we actively avoiding, and at what cost? What does our ego feel entitled and justified to do? And to what extent do these entitlements and justifications limit our capacity to face and address the challenge at hand? The second step back is the step back from our generational cohort. So how are the associated challenges perceived and experienced by different generations? How are different generations interpreting reality differently, experiencing it differently, and expecting different things from it? And how come? How fast are these changes happening? And what is your generation being called out on? To what extent are the interests of incoming generations represented in your usual problem-solving, coordination, and accountability approaches? Step back 3 is step back from the universalization of your social, cultural, and economic parameters of normality. And the questions involve: what does the privilege you carry prevent you from seeing and experiencing? How is your privilege also a loss? What are you projecting as true, real, normal, and desirable for everyone? And how does that reflect your own background? How can these projections become harmful to others and/or limit possibilities for relationship building and/or coordination? Who could refuse to work with you on legitimate grounds. The fourth step back is the step back from your immediate context and time. How do the challenges in your immediate context reflect wider patterns of change in society across different timescales? What historical, systemic, or structural forces are at work? What is your perspective of the larger picture? And what are the boundaries of this perspective? How is it limited? Step back 5 is step back from familiar patterns of relationship building and problem solving that you have been socialized into. To what extent has your approach to the problem been conditioned and limited by the culture it emerged from? What alternative ways of seeing, doing, relating, and being are already viable, but are currently unimaginable to you and those around you? What are you missing out on? Who or what are you accountable to, and how come? What accountabilities are you denying, rejecting, or neglecting? What are you indifferent to, and how come? Step 6 is step back from the normalized patterns of elevating humanity above the rest of nature. So to what extent and how is what is unfolding a consequence of the perceived separation between man and nature, and of the rendering of nature as a property? How would you approach the problem differently if other species and entities like rivers, coral reefs, mountains had legal personhood? If you could be liable for damages, negligence, injury, and ecocide? And if they were accorded independent and inalienable rights to exist and to flourish, like the rights of nature? To what extent are the interests of other species represented in your problem posing, problem solving, accountability, and coordination approaches? And step 7 is the step back from the impulse to find quick fixes in order to expand your capacity not to be immobilized by uncertainty, complicity, and complexity. So in what ways is your approach to the problem part of the problem? To what extent are you being driven by desires for innocence, for benevolence, for hopefulness, like in the savior complex trend? And how can these desires be harmful and or detrimental to the task at hand? How can you leverage the recognition of complicity in systemic harm towards deeper and more enduring forms of responsibility and accountability? And to what extent are you equipped to repair and weave relationships grounded on trust, respect, consent, reciprocity, and accountability? So here's my intermission. If we look at modern education, it's almost impossible to take these steps back. So one of the things we're doing in the collective is to try to map the capacities that have been exiled by modern education and that need to be reactivated so that we can hold space differently and show up differently to each other. So here I'm just going to mention 3 of these capacities that are extremely important. We have mapped 12. So the first capacity is diffractive reasoning, which is the capacity to hold different moving layers of reality complexity in front of you, including the tensions and paradoxes between the layers without flattening the layers, which is what modern education teaches us to do. The second capacity is the capacity for psychodynamic self-assessment, which is the capacity to observe and learn from the dynamic of one's own cognitive, affective, and relational responses to an issue without over-identifying with a single response. So if you have read the book, this is about the bus, the ability to see the complexity inside, to hold space for the complexity inside, and to parent the toddlers that we all have inside of us in order to be able to show up to the complexity outside in a way that you can help and support the holding of it. And the third one is polysemic awareness, which is the capacity to observe language in movement and to focus on the movement rather than on the form, and to see language and to change our relationship with language as an always ambivalent social and cultural production of meaning. So in the Hospicing Modernity book, I talk about the difference between wording the world and worlding the world, and seeing stories and words as entities that are dancing with us. And in the sense, it's only this relationship with language that would allow, in the composting of the shit, that would allow us to declutter the space within us so that it is the land itself that comes up with the imagination that we will need for a genuinely different future. So as part of this intermission, I also said that we were going to do a rude diagnostic exercise. And because we're talking about the infrastructure of the imagination, it's very important, if we're going to be starting with the shit, to talk about the modern colonial internal cognitive, affective, and relational infrastructures. So it's the shit that we have inherited and that colonizes our unconscious and limits our imaginations in ways that we don't see. So a rude diagnostic exercise invites you to see the familiar in a strange way. And the point of the exercise, because it's diagnostic, is that the content of the experience is your response. So the exercise is just there to provoke something on your bus internally and ask you to observe that. So this is what we're going to do. And it's like a list poem that I'm just going to read that talks about what we've been conditioned to want. What it's not just about our head, not even just about our hearts. It's about the gut. What in our gut has modern colonial society by design configured us to want, to think, and to do. So the first part of the poem is about dominion and triumph of humans over nature, of men over women, of women over men, of white over indigenous black and brown, of indigenous black and brown over white, of cis hetero over trans queer, of trans queer over cis hetero, and so on and so forth. It's about ownership of land, of human bodies, of other species, of others' labor, of merit, of capital, of pride, of privilege, of delusions of superiority, of your own brand and carefully crafted self-image. It's about consumption of stuff, of knowledge, of information, of critique, of erudition, of data, of experiences, of relationships, of outrage, of love and care, of arts and politics, of beauty, of pain, of community and intimacy. It's about entitlement to self-expression, to self-satisfaction, to moral high grounds, to authority, autonomy, and arbitration, to validation and affirmation, to possession and possessiveness, to emotional extraction, to relational exploitation, and to intellectual masturbation. It's about demands for self-congratulatory, for self-celebratory, for self-promoting and self-affirming experiences, for reality curated to one's liking, for certainty, comfort, and control, for attention, likes, and dopamine, for soothing, numbing, and coddling, for self-actualization and self-realization, for easy formulas and quick fixes, and for pleasure-filled idealizations. It's about birthrights of self-interest, self-centeredness, exceptionalism, complacency, escapism, arrogance, innocence, purity, futurity, impunity, immunity, and indifference to harms inflicted and one's metabolic entanglement. So I'll invite you again to look at the responses you're having to the poem and to the way that things are presented to encounter something familiar in a strange way. And then I will invite you to the other part of the exercise of steps back and forward. So this time it's to step forward. So I invite you to step forward with honesty and courage to see what you don't want to see. I invite you to commit to expanding your capacity to sit with what's real, difficult, and painful, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the broken of humanity within and around you. In what ways are your projections, idealizations, expectations, hopes, fears, and fragilities preventing you from approaching the aspects of the problem that are unpleasant for you and that challenge your sense of reality or self-image? What aspects of the challenge at hand are you not willing or ready to see, and how this impairs your ability to address the challenge itself? Step forward with humility to find strength in openness and vulnerability. Commit to shedding your conditioned arrogance and sense of merit, status, and self-importance in order to decenter yourself and center the challenge you're trying to address. In what ways are you reproducing patterns that center your desire for recognition, validation, prestige, and protagonism? For example, again, the savior complex. How can these desires limit your capacity to build relationships and to mobilize the coordination that is necessary for the challenge at hand? Step forward with self-reflexivity so that you can read yourself and learn to read the room. Commit to tracing where your cognitive, affective, and relational patterns of engaging with reality are coming from, where they're at, where they're going, their limitations, and the ways they impact others and are part of the problem. Learn to step back from yourself in order to read the room and to read how you and what you're doing consciously and unconsciously are being read in the room. Learn to see oneself from other people's perspectives, especially the unflattering parts, and learn to be okay with that because you cannot control it anyway. Step forward with self-discipline to do the work on yourself so that you don't become work for other people. Commit to identifying and interrupting compulsions and impulses grounded on socially sanctioned and conditioned harmful patterns, such as greed, vanity, arrogance, indifference, indulgence, extraction, and consumption of time, labor, and energy of others. To what extent are you aware of your compulsions and unhealthy reality coping mechanisms? How do you justify the continuity of these patterns to yourself? Then step forward with maturity to do what is needed rather than what you want to do. Commit to the long-term project of becoming a good elder and good ancestor for all relations, taking into account that mainstream culture encourages and rewards self-infantilization and the denial of responsibility. So how can you reorient yourself towards eldership and generational accountability? To what extent are you aware of the complexity of your own thoughts, emotions, investments, and patterns of relationship building, the internal conversations that are happening within you? What stories that you're telling yourself need to be further examined? What learning and unlearning have you been avoiding? And why and at what cost for yourself and for others? Step forward with expanding discernment and attention. Commit to expanding our capacity for discernment in proportion to the increasing complexity. This includes your capacity to read across time and across different layers of reality, and to hold paradoxes, tensions, and uncertainties in view. What do you need to learn or unlearn cognitively, effectively, and relationally in order not to be immobilized and or overwhelmed by complexity, ambiguity, plurality, and unknowability? And finally, forward with adaptability, flexibility, stamina, and resilience for the long haul. Move for the sake of learning to coordinate and be transformed by the process rather than arrive somewhere. Be prepared to fall, to fail, to have your plans shattered, to be stretched, to have your heart broken open, not apart, to change course and to find joy in the struggle itself rather than in the imagined prize at the end. To what extent are your desires and calculations to arrive at the predetermined destination, preventing you from engaging in the experiments and experimentations whose failures will provide the data for new directions to take and better places we may aspire to go together that we cannot imagine from the outset? So in order to wrap this up, I'll finish with the metaphor that we use in the book about learning to walk a tightrope, holding a rod of, on the one, like trying to balance relational rigor and intellectual rigor, and trying to learn to walk with honesty, humility, humor, and hyper self-reflexivity, trying not to fall into the abyss of desperate hope where we hold on and hang on. And we hold on to either the chosen people or heroic authorities, or a special practice or a nostalgic time. And at the same time, we also are trying to avoid falling into the trap of reckless hopelessness, where we find hedonism, misanthropy, whateverism, and also the banalization of brutality. And there you find also a compass of, we use sometimes sobriety, sometimes serenity, which is the interruption of compulsion. So sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability as we weave ourselves into the future, into becoming elders and good ancestors for all relations. I think I'm going to stop it here, and I'm really curious about the chat, and with Frezi, you can see both at the same time. So thank you for listening to me today. This is the first time I used the invitations with the root exercise, so I would be very happy also to see how it landed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I think you've had everyone spellbound, so I'm sure there's going to be a flood of responses now as people have been sitting and going on this journey with you rather than typing or engaging. But I can see the different reactions and responses coming in. I have no doubt that many people will be so resourced from what you've shared and will be thinking about very specific relationships or situations where those 7 steps back and the 7 steps forward help unlock something that is breaking down at the moment. I feel like I want to print it out and put it on the wall next to me because it's such a useful resource. Just to kind of share some reflections on what you've shared with us, starting with sitting with the shit and the importance of that, and using that as the foundations with which we create the future. Think, these 7 steps back and 7 steps forward, I feel like, sometimes you just hear language that gives words to what your heart is wrestling with, and it's just a spell that I can just see being used in so many different contexts and relationships, and this kind of reminder about what capacities within us have been exiled and how do we regain them through different methodologies and tools and resources that you've shared with us today. I mean, I just feel like the mixture of like mind-blowing and really tangible and practical is so powerful. So thank you so much. You are shockingly clear and serene for the time of the morning that it is at you. So we really appreciate you sharing with us. And thank you so much. I hope you can get back to sleep now. I don't know if it's too late, if you've passed that point in the day.
We'll try. So at least have 1 more hour.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and look forward to connecting with more of your work over the next few. You've already been referenced today many times, and I'm no doubt you'll be referenced again. But thank you so much for joining us. And all the best. Thank you.
I will put, I think I've put it already on the chat, but now I don't remember. That's what happens with my mind in the morning, but I will put the published exercises on the chat.
Brilliant. Yes, everyone is asking for them. So I'm sure that'll be very appreciated. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.